Welcome back to Lilly's Viking adventure, or if you're new, well met. Today we will be delving into one of my personal favourites, the history of the world's most revered knight, an absolute legend, William Marshal. Before we get going, if you'd like to support the channel, as it is not monetized by YouTube, please boop the like button, hit subscribe. Only 6% of return visitors are subscribed. Or go to the description and check out our Etsy store, Viking Adventure Gifts. We appreciate any support you're able to give. With that out of the way, let's dig in. The story of William Marshal begins in chaos and iron, in a land where kings bled for crowns, and the innocent were but pawns in their father's games. Born in 1146, the fourth son of John Marshal, William entered a world where inheritance meant power, and a younger son had little hope but to carve his destiny in steel. He would, and in the doing, he would become more than a knight. He would become a legend. When civil war tore England apart, William's father defied King Stephen. The price was the boy's life. Just 5 years old, William was handed over as a hostage, a living pledge that his father would yield. Chroniclers wrote of that chilling moment when Stephen threatened to hang the child if John Marshal did not surrender. John's reply was cold as forged iron. "I still have the hammer and the anvil to forge still finer sons." But Stephen hesitated. Some say it was pity, others whisper it was the fire in the boy's eyes, a quiet courage that defied the threat of death. Whatever the reason, William lived, and that spark of fortune would follow him all his days. As a youth, he was sent to Normandy, to the household of William de Tancarville. There, amid the clash of swords and the bite of cold mornings, William learned the trade of knighthood. He learned to ride not merely with skill, but with the unity of horse and man that made a knight terrifying on the field. He learned the sword as an extension of his own will, the lance as a force of reckoning. And when he returned to the tilt-yard, the world began to take notice. By his 20s, William was the hero of the tournament fields. These were not the colourful jousts of later centuries. These were brutal melee, great storms of iron and muscle where men fought in chaotic bands, seizing ransom and glory with equal ferocity. The Histoire de Guillaume le Maréchal praises him without reserve. No man was his equal. Wherever there was danger, there rode the Marshal, striking as God had given him strength. His fame spread across France and Anjou, across courts and keeps. And with that fame came the favour of kings. Henry II, fierce and shrewd, saw in the young knight a weapon honed by loyalty and tempered by honour. William became a royal knight, a servant of the crown. When Henry's son, the young King Henry, was knighted, William was given charge of him. Together they rode in tournaments and skirmishes, their bond one of teacher and student, of master and brother-in-arms. When the young king died in 1183, it was William who fulfilled his lord's dying wish, carrying his cloak to the Holy Land in pilgrimage, a gesture of loyalty so rare it set him apart from all others. Richard the Lionheart inherited both the throne and the Marshal's allegiance. When Richard rode to crusade, chasing glory beneath the burning sun of Acre, it was William who kept England steady. He guarded the realm, navigated the treacherous currents of baronial unrest, and when Richard returned, it was to find his lands intact, his throne unshaken, and one knight whose loyalty had never faltered. King John was no Lionheart. Suspicious and mercurial, he distrusted even his closest men. Yet William remained steadfast. He counselled peace where John sowed discord, and when rebellion tore through the land, it was William who held the line, the one man all sides respected. Chronicler Matthew Paris would later write, "No man was more faithful in arms, nor wiser in counsel, nor gentler in peace." By 1189, Richard sought to reward the knight who had served him with such unwavering devotion. The prize was no mere title. William was granted the hand of Isabel de Clare, the wealthiest heiress in England and Ireland. It was a union that transformed William from a landless knight into one of the most powerful lords in Christendom. But it was more than a political alliance. In Isabel, William found not just a wife, but a partner. Together they raised 10 children, 5 sons and 5 daughters, and together they managed their vast holdings. Isabel's wisdom steadied him, her presence a quiet strength that endured through decades of turmoil. Historian Thomas Asbridge writes, "Marshal's marriage to Isabel de Clare was the making of him, not just in terms of land and power, but in the creation of a family that he fiercely loved and loyally protected. In a world where love was rarely the currency of marriage, theirs was an enduring bond of respect and affection." The battles. The Battle of Lincoln deserves to be told not as dry fact, but as a living tale of thunder and iron, where an old man defied the years and saved a kingdom. The year was 1217, and England lay on a knife's edge. King John was dead, his sins still smouldering in the hearts of his barons, and a boy, Henry III, barely 9 years old, now wore the crown. Prince Louis of France, son of King Philip, had crossed the Channel, answering the call of rebel lords who sought to replace the Plantagenets with a Capetian king. Much of England had already bent the knee. Only a few strongholds remained loyal. Among them, battered and defiant, stood Lincoln Castle, its walls commanded by the indomitable Lady Nicola de la Haye, a woman whose courage equaled any knight's. Yet even her stone bastion could not withstand the weight of French siege engines forever. Into this storm rode William Marshal, 70 winters etched upon his body, scars across his flesh like runes of old battles. He was regent now, guardian of the child king, but still, when war called, he was a knight before all else. His hair was white, his strength less than in his prime, yet the fire within him had not dimmed. Chroniclers tell us he declared before the battle, "If all else fail, I shall take the boy king upon my shoulders, and we shall fight until death." At dawn on May 20th, Marshal arrayed his men. His force was smaller than the enemy's, 400 knights, some foot soldiers, and the desperate courage of the loyal. The French and rebel army outnumbered them, their banners rippling in the spring wind. But Marshal had more than numbers. He had cunning, the wisdom of a lifetime, and the heart of a lion that would not yield. His plan was audacity itself. While Nicola's garrison sallied forth from the castle in a thunder of arrows and stones, Marshal led his cavalry in a furious charge from outside the walls. The rebels found themselves crushed between an anvil of stone and a hammer of steel. Imagine the scene: the roar of hooves upon the earth, the clash of sword against shield, the thunder of lances breaking like lightning on the enemy ranks. And at the front, William Marshal himself, the old man who should have been bent with age, yet rode as if God had poured youth back into his veins. Chronicler Roger of Wendover wrote with awe, "Though he had numbered 70 winters, he rode as one aflame with youth and struck like a tempest loosed." Panic seized the enemy. The French line buckled, their banners torn down, their knights scattered. Men fled in all directions, casting aside shields, trampling each other in their desperation to escape. The battle became a rout, and Lincoln, and England, was saved. In the aftermath, the field was littered with armor and riches, so much plunder that men mocked it as Lincoln fare. Yet for William Marshal, the true prize was not wealth. It was the survival of the boy he guarded, the crown preserved, the realm kept whole. The victory at Lincoln broke the rebellion's back. Prince Louis sued for peace, and the Treaty of Lambeth soon followed, driving the French from English soil. It was William's final, crowning achievement, the capstone of a life spent in service, loyalty, and courage. The Battle of Lincoln was not merely a clash of armies. It was the living proof that honor, wisdom, and daring could triumph even when youth and numbers were gone. An old knight, wielding the weight of a lifetime, had saved a dynasty. And with it, he secured his place not just in chronicles, but in legend. The Young King's Campaigns, 1173 to 1174. The rebellion of 1173 was a storm that set father against son. Henry II's realm stretched across England and France, a patchwork empire held together by iron will. But his heir, Henry the Young King, restless and ambitious, chafed under his father's control. The boy prince had the title of king, but none of the power, and his pride drove him into rebellion, joined by brothers and barons eager to carve their own fortunes. William Marshal, sworn to the young king, rode into this chaos as both guardian and guide. He was not yet the legend he would become, but his reputation for valor was already spreading like fire in dry fields. Chroniclers write of Marshal's loyalty. When the young king's rashness led him into peril, it was William's sword that shielded him. Picture the fields of Normandy, churned mud beneath the hooves of destriers, the twilight haze broken by the glint of steel. Rebel barons surged with their men, and the young king's banners threatened to fall. But in the maelstrom, William became a wall of iron. His sword rose and fell, cutting paths through the enemy, while his lance thundered into armored ranks like a bolt loosed from heaven. One chronicler recalls that in a desperate fight, Marshal cut down a knight who aimed his blade at the prince. He stood over Henry like a lion protecting its cub. His armor battered, his shield cracked, but his spirit unbroken. The rebellion was long and bitter, but when the young king died of illness in 1183, it was William who carried his cloak east to Jerusalem, fulfilling a dying request, a knightly pilgrimage that would burnish his name with both valor and piety. The Siege of Mirabeau, 1202. By 1202, William Marshal was no longer the young tournament champion, but a seasoned lord, his lands vast, his family secure. Yet war was never far from the Plantagenet crown. King John, treacherous and mistrusted, faced rebellion from his nephew Arthur of Brittany, who allied with the French and laid siege to the castle of Mirabeau. Within its walls was the aged Eleanor of Aquitaine, mother of both Richard and John, the great matriarch of the dynasty. If Eleanor fell, John's claim would collapse. The siege tightened, French and rebel engines battering at the walls. Dust and smoke hung over the fortress, Eleanor's garrison dwindling, hope fraying like a torn banner. But Marshal, alongside John, rode hard and struck fast. Their army fell upon the besiegers with the fury of a hawk upon prey. The streets of Mirabeau became rivers of chaos. Shouts echoed off stone walls as knights clashed in narrow alleys, blades ringing against helmets, blood staining the cobbles. William Marshal, in his late 50s, rode at the vanguard, his destrier crashing through enemy lines. Chroniclers say his lance shattered upon impact, but he drew his sword without pause, cutting through rebels like wheat before the scythe. The French were caught off guard, their siege lines broken, their leaders captured. Arthur of Brittany himself was taken prisoner, his rebellion strangled in its cradle. The victory was devastating. Hundreds of enemies chained and dragged away. The Plantagenet dynasty preserved yet again. Though King John's cruelty would tarnish the aftermath, Arthur's mysterious death in captivity casting suspicion on him forever, William Marshal's role in the Storm of Mirbeau was unblemished. He had defended Eleanor, defended the crown, and shown once more that when the fate of a dynasty trembled, he would be the shield between ruin and survival, the thread that binds them. Across decades, the pattern repeats: Normandy, Mirbeau, Lincoln. Whenever the Plantagenet line faltered, William Marshal was there. Young, he was the sword arm of the heir. In his prime, he was the savior of a dynasty. And in old age, he was the bulwark of a boy king. The chroniclers were right when they wrote, "He was the best knight that ever lived." Time, however, spares no man. When John died in 1216, the kingdom fell into chaos. A child, Henry III, thrust onto a throne surrounded by enemies. William was 70 years old, his hair grey, his body scarred from decades of war. Yet when England called, he answered. As regent, he led not from the safety of council chambers, but from the saddle. At the Battle of Lincoln in 1217, the old knight rode at the head of his men. But even the greatest knight must one day lay down his sword. In 1219, knowing the end was near, William took the cross of the Knights Templar, fulfilling a vow made in his youth. Surrounded by his family and the men who had followed him through fire and storm, he bid farewell to the world he had shaped. On May 14th of that year, William Marshal, the greatest knight, passed into legend. They buried him in the Temple Church in London, where his effigy still lies. Stone hands folded on a stone sword, the quiet dignity of a man who had lived a life of honor. The Histoire de Guillaume le Maréchal closes with a line that lingers like the tolling of a bell. He was the best knight that ever lived. Modern historians echo the sentiment. Thomas Asbridge calls him the very flower of chivalry, a man who rose by courage and loyalty to become the paragon of knighthood in the medieval world. In addition to all this, he also had a great chivalric romance. A knight's heart, the Lady Isabel. For all his battles, there was one victory William Marshal did not win with a sword: his marriage to Lady Isabel de Clare. It was 1189, and Richard the Lionheart, preparing to claim his throne and depart for the Crusades, rewarded William for decades of loyalty and service. The prize was no small gift. Isabel de Clare was one of the greatest heiresses of the age, her dowry stretching from the rolling estates of England to the wild lands of Leinster in Ireland. Chroniclers record the marriage with admiration, noting how it elevated a knight, once a younger son with no inheritance, to the ranks of the greatest lords in Christendom. But their union was more than political gain. By all accounts, William treated Isabel not merely as property, but as a partner, a rare mark of respect in a time when noblewomen were often pawns in dynastic games. Together, they built a family of 10 children, 5 sons and 5 daughters, and together they managed a vast empire of lands and castles. Historian Thomas Asbridge observes, Marshal's marriage to Isabel de Clare was the making of him, not just in terms of land and power, but in the creation of a family that he fiercely loved and loyally protected. Through rebellions, wars, and shifting allegiances, Isabel remained his anchor, the quiet strength behind the public figure of the greatest knight. When William rode to battle, her banner often flew alongside his. When he counselled kings, her wisdom tempered his decisions. And when his time came, in the quiet halls of his home, Isabel was there, her presence steady, her love unwavering, as the knight who had served 4 kings finally laid down his sword. William Marshal's story is not just history, it is legend. The boy hostage who became the hero of a kingdom. The landless knight who won the love of a lady and built a family that would shape dynasties. The loyal servant of 4 kings who never broke his word, never betrayed his code. His life is proof that greatness is forged not only in battle, but in loyalty, in love, and in the quiet strength of a man who held to his honor when all others faltered. And so the greatest knight rides on, through the annals of time, his legacy as enduring as the stone that marks his rest. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life of William Marshal. If this tale of loyalty, courage, and love stirred your spirit, give this video a like, share it with your fellow adventurers, and subscribe for more stories of heroes and legends. And if you'd like to support the channel, visit our Etsy store, Viking Adventure Gifts, where history lives in every gift. Until next time, keep your sword sharp, your honor true, and your spirit adventurous.